Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso has made waves, and he has made a bigger impact, although he's only been in government for a few years, than many of his fellow African leaders have made even after being in government for decades. Ben, you've heard of the man.
Yes, good day to you and good day to our viewers. Thank you for joining us. Yes, I've been listening. I've been following eagerly too of this young gentleman. You know, he has really made a positive impact. His speeches are worth listening to because he is practicing it and is putting in the work to show that he is doing things for his countrymen. He is making roads to so that his people can actually start enjoying their own country and the fruits of the labor of it, which I think we should speak about, because in Africa we don't really get leaders like that. We really don't have such kind of leaders, which is very worrying.
Well, here he is talking about the media, particularly the Western media. We just have played for a little bit to listen to what he had to say.
Or, I'm watching you all. I'm recording every lie. I'm archiving every distortion. I am Ibrahim Traore, and today I'm pulling off your masks. Yes, you heard correctly. I, whom you call a young military junta leader, whom you brand as a dangerous radical, whom you serve up as an anti-Western dictator, am now telling you the truth. And this time you cannot turn off your microphones. This time you cannot turn away your cameras. This time your editors cannot cut this speech, because the world you monopolize no longer exists. Because millions will hear these words now, without passing through your filters, without being subjected to your distortions, without being muddied by your lies. I am 34 years old. Every day of my life, I grew up with your lies. As a child, I would watch Africa on television. Always the same images: children with flies, dry lands, weapons, death. This is Africa, they told us. This is what Africa is. And we believed it. We were ashamed of ourselves. We were ashamed of our own lands, of our own people. But then I grew up. I read, I researched, I questioned, and I understood that the Africa you showed us wasn't real. The story you told us was a lie. The fate you imposed on us was a script you had written. For years, how have you portrayed Africa? How have you shown it? How have you sold it to your viewers? As if we were creatures who had no share of humanity, as if we were savages left outside of civilization, as if we were wretches waiting for you to save us. Every day, every hour, every minute, the same story plays on your screens. Hunger, war, disease, corruption, terror, chaos. These are the words that come to mind when Africa is mentioned. In your Africa dictionary, there are no other words. No hope, no success, no development, no resistance, no honor, no pride, no victory. So I ask you, New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, Le Monde, have you ever made Africa's successes your headlines? How many times have you written about Rwanda's technology miracle? How many times have you shown Ethiopia's reforestation project? How many times have you praised Botswana's democratic success? How many times have you described Kenya's entrepreneurial ecosystem? No, because these don't fit your scenario. Your Africa cannot be successful. It cannot, because then how will you legitimize your exploitation? If it's not in need of help, how will you intervene? If it's not backward, how will you look down on it? Have you ever asked yourselves, has any editor sitting at their desk, any news director in a meeting, any columnist at their keyboard ever thought, why are the people of the world's richest lands poor? Here are the numbers for you, real numbers. Africa owns 70% of the world's cobalt reserves. Your cell phone, your computer, your electric car won't work without cobalt. This cobalt comes from Congo, but Congolese can't afford cell phones. Africa owns 90% of the world's platinum reserves. Catalytic converters, electronic devices, medical implants, they all need platinum. This platinum comes from South Africa, But South Africans are crushed by unemployment. Africa provides 30% of the world's gold production. Mali, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Tanzania. Gold flows like rivers from our lands, but our people swim in poverty. Africa.
Gold flows like rivers from Africa, and yet our people wallow in abject poverty. You cannot deny that that is a fact. One of the tragic realities is that when Africa gained its independence, unfortunately, most of the continent's leaders have become corrupt. Zimbabwe in 2023, we learned that the country had $2 billion worth of gold being processed every year. And 80% of that was being smuggled out of the country. In other words, the nation was not benefiting from the $1.6 billion. This is the tragedy of Africa. As much as one would agree with President Traore that Africa has been portrayed as a failure, some of that failure we've been responsible for writing that script ourselves. What makes him different is that he has written, in his few years in power, a totally different script. The wealth that used to flow out of Burkina Faso is now being kept in the country. Instead of billions of dollars being used to buy cars, a fleet of cars for the president and his ministers and so forth, he has insisted that that money should be used to invest in buying farming equipment and machinery to improve the agricultural produce of the country. That is a totally different script that he has written. And I think that is what has made him so popular, particularly with many Africans and many people from developing countries. Because that is exactly what the leaders should be looking at. And unfortunately, for the overwhelming majority of our African leaders, for some of us, since the country's independence, they have not had that kind of vision. They have written a totally different script. Ben?
You know, there's a key word that we must underline when we speak about Africa. And I think the key word is democracy. Free, fair, credible elections. A government by the people and for the people. This is what lacks in Africa. I mean, one good example of a country that enjoys democracy is Botswana, and President Traore mentioned him. And I think that's a very, very good thing. And when you look at the ratings of Botswana itself, in terms of GDP, it ranks right above there. When you talk about the state, just the happiness of the country, they rank right above there. You know, I can say the economy is sound, the political system is sound, their social system is sound because of them being able to hold free, fair, and credible elections. And when their election process happens and ends, there is no one that is fighting anybody about unfairness and so forth, rigging. And everybody accepts and everybody is happy with the outcome and they move forward as a nation. Most African countries lack that. And if you look at those African countries that lack democracy, they rank the lowest. For example, just across, the border, there's Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe ranks the lowest in almost everything. Just like its name is right at the bottom, it is right at the bottom in terms of the happiness of the people. The economy is struggling. The exact opposite of Botswana is Zimbabwe. You would say that is that prodigal child, the one that doesn't listen, that is the trouble of the whole family, the family which would be a Sadak. That is how you would liken Zimbabwe, and I'm glad he spoke about Botswana, and he gave them that credit to say the democracy that is found in Botswana, and you find Botswana is right up there and it's flourishing. If only Africa could also follow in its footsteps, we would not be this black continent and the poor continent that we are labeled.
Well, one other important thing to note here is that Traore has come through the process, the same process that other leaders have followed. In other words, when he was aspiring for power, he denounced corruption, the waste of resources, the political oppression, etc., etc. The trouble with our leaders, most of our African leaders, and here we can start talking of Mugabe and these ZANU-PF colleagues. Before independence, one of the rallying calls was one man, one vote. And when they got into power, in fact, when they could now see that the end was near, country's independence was coming, they changed that. Instead of one man, one vote, they changed. They now suddenly decided in the 1980 elections that they would not accept the result of the election unless ZANU-PF wins. So out of the window was gone one man, one vote. They didn't care about one man, one vote anymore. They wanted to be the ones to rule. When Mnangagwa ousted Robert Mugabe in 2017, he was talking of democracy and making sure that there are free, fair, and credible elections. And yet, as soon as he got his feet under the desk, one man, one vote was forgotten, and corruption has been rampant in Zimbabwe. In fact, many people would say it's worse under Mnangagwa than it was during Mugabe's time. What has happened? Well, a complete metamorphosis is what has happened with some of these African leaders. We are familiar with the metamorphosis that changed the caterpillar to a butterfly. In this case here, I think one can say we're talking of frank Kafka's metamorphosis, in which a human being changes into a cockroach. The same leaders who were saying they want the respect of human rights, democracy, justice, and so forth, as soon as they test power, they become cockroaches. They become the very thing that they were sent out to change. That is one of the tragedies. And that, I believe, is at the heart of what has made Traore so totally different. Where other African leaders have changed to cockroaches, he has maintained his humanity. He has continued to fight to end corruption, mismanagement, and the abuse of the ordinary people. Ben.
As his speech, as he was going along with his speech, he mentioned that Africa is rich in mineral wealth, but we really don't have much to show for that. Again, I'll give you an example of Zimbabwe and Botswana. These are I think, two opposites. Botswana, there's democracy. And when I explain democracy, I said it's a government by the people and for the people. And whoever leaders are chosen are accountable to the people. So you find a country like Botswana has one mineral, diamond. But with that one mineral, they have managed to amass wealth in their reserves into the billions of dollars just because of democracy. Go across the border, Zimbabwe has got a vast minerals, you name it, gold, lithium, diamond itself is also there. But recently, the president only availed that Zimbabwe had 300 million, and of that 300 million in the reserves, that was supposed to secure a currency. You see, zero democracy, always disputed elections, always fighting, always, fighting its people. That is something that you can wait to see. There's an ingredient that is lacking, one has and one does not have. And I think the problem again, why Africa remains poor and invites this tag on itself, is the absence of democracy. There is no accountability. Hence, whoever is in leadership positions is amassing wealth, looting and inviting their friends and relatives to join in the loot. And at the end of the day, the citizens really don't have, and this is where he's saying there is unemployment. citizens are not happy. This is what it is.
Well, it will be amiss if we've left out the fact that Zimbabwe is a failed state because we've got ZANU-PF, whom, as I mentioned earlier on, whose leaders aspired to a free democratic Zimbabwe before they got into power. And then power corrupted them. But in the last 45 years, we should have ended ZANU-PF dictatorship if the opposition too had not been corrupted. The opposition, MDC, CCC, have been on the political stage for the last 25 years now, including the 5 in the 2008 to 2013 GNU. They failed to implement even one democratic reform during that period. Why? Because as soon as they got into power, Mugabe bribed them with the trappings of high office, and they forgot all about implementing the reforms. The transformation, the metamorphosis of being a human being to a cockroach took place. And this is at the heart of why Zimbabwe is a failed state. Our opposition, as much as the people elected them for the primary purpose of implementing democratic reforms to ensure free, fair, and credible elections, the truth of the matter is they have sold out. Ever since the GNU, in fact, the MDC, CCC have participated in flawed elections, knowing fully well that ZANU-PF was rigging, knowing fully well that by participating they are giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. But they've continued participating because they also knew that ZANU-PF was giving away a few gravity seats to entice the opposition to participate. And the tragedy for Zimbabwe is millions of the voters out there have failed to see MDC leaders' metamorphosis from human beings fighting to implement reforms. The party itself was named Movement for Democratic Change, fighting to implement democratic changes, to become partners of ZANU-PF. And it doesn't help the country. Because right now we are looking at next election 2028. The MDC, CCC leaders, whatever new name they're going to call themselves, will participate in those flawed elections and con their followers to participate, knowing fully well that by participating, they're only giving ZANU-PF legitimacy and perpetuating the dictatorship. How much the country would have benefited if we had a leader in ZANU-PF or the opposition who could stand up and be counted, as President Ibrahim Traore has done, and not undergo this metamorphosis of being turned from a human being to a cockroach. Ben, do you want to give your closing remarks?
Yes, in conclusion, I would want to put a plea to President Traore. He needs to give his country free, fair, and credible elections. Lead by example in that department. Show that, you really mean this change. Remove this tag that has been cast on you, or that has been put on you. He is already popular, and I think the people of Burkina Faso would not want to lose such a national treasure as him as early as that. So really there is nothing to lose, and by doing so, people will listen, people will take you seriously, because you are doing and you're walking the walk, you're walking the talk, whatever you are saying you are doing, and that alone speaks volumes. There is nothing to lose. Let us do the right thing. Every citizen and every country deserves free, fair, and credible elections. And once you have established democracy, you get accountability, and then all other things will fall into place. Like what Kwame Nkrumah says, seek ye first the political kingdom, and the rest, social, economic, you name it, will fall into place. This is just a plea, This is how I see things. It would make a huge difference to show that here is a young man that is also wanting to walk the democratic path, and people will give you that respect that you deserve going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. My closing remark would be that yes, so far, President Traore has shown that it is possible for African leaders to still retain their humanity, their human form they had when they were aspiring for power, and not go through this metamorphosis, turning into a cockroach. And I would like to reiterate what you were saying there, Ben, that President Traore's next task should be to make sure that Burkina Faso has healthy and functioning democratic institutions to guarantee political stability and economic prosperity of that country, not only during his term of office, but for generations to come. And the only sure way of making sure that happens is making sure that the democratic institutions are strong. They have a strong constitution. That is important. That is a big foundation. And that, at the present moment, is one of the very rare things that has ever been achieved in Africa. I totally agree. Botswana is one of the few African countries, South Africa is another, where democratic institutions are strong and they've been able to hold free, fair, and credible elections consistently. That is what Burkina Faso should be aspiring to. And I hope President Ibrahim Traore will create and make that possible. Thank you very much, those of you who were able to join us today. I hope you'll be able to do it again tomorrow. Same time, 7 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Zimbabwe time. Have a good day.